Hi everybody, I'm Scott August and I want to talk a little bit about the Pueblo Anasazi style flute. I get lots of emails from people that are looking to buy one of these instruments and they're not really sure what to look for. So I thought I'd put together this little informal video just to discuss what I look for when I'm going to purchase one of these instruments. Now, when I talk about the Pueblo Anasazi style flute, I'm also going to be referring to the Mojave 6 style, the long count, and also the lost tuning, and any other flute that is based on an end-blown Pueblo style of construction. So this will apply to a lot of different types of flutes. So the flute that I just played at the opening, this is an A-flat Anasazi style flute, very long, made of curly redwood by Jeffrey Ellis. And because it's a dark wood and it's so long, it's a little hard to demonstrate with. So I'm going to use another flute to illustrate the things that I look for. So let me get it here. So these are the two flutes together. This is a Mojave 6 style, and this is the Anasazi that I just played. But for all intents and purposes, they're made the same way, so we can talk about the same aspects of what to look for when you're buying one of these instruments. So the first thing you want to look for when you're going to purchase an end-blown flute like this is you want to make sure that the instrument itself is nice and straight. It should have no bows, undulations, it shouldn't be crooked. Pretty straightforward thing to look for. The other thing is the inside. This is a hollow tube, as you can see there. You're going to be blowing across the mouthpiece and air is going to be flowing through this instrument, and so obviously you want the inside of the instrument to be as smooth as possible. So just take your finger, put it inside, rub it around a little bit. It should be smooth. You shouldn't feel any bits of stray wood. There shouldn't be any grooves inside of it from where the drill went through. Doesn't necessarily have to be sealed, although sealed is good. A lot of makers use some sort of epoxy, and that makes for a nice, smooth surface for the air to go through. Same thing with the mouthpiece. Just stick your finger in, move it around, see if it's nice and clean. It should be. These flutes are replicas of flutes that were found in northern Arizona in the 30s. And they had just a flat mouthpiece and with no notch on it, which we'll get to in a second. They were a little bit beveled all around, probably against a rock. But the ones that are made today, the mouthpiece sometimes has a little curve to it. It just sort of angles down just slightly. One thing that I would caution against is if this curve is very exaggerated, if it really cuts in, I would not get that flute. What that does is it makes it seem like it's easier to play the bottom notes very quickly, but as you play higher up into the flute scale itself, and especially when you get the upper octaves, it's going to force the mouthpiece to dip down because you cut so much wood away. You want to seal that up, so you're going to pull it down. And that's actually a bad thing because it's going to pull the notch away from your lips, especially when you're trying to go for the flutes in the higher register. If anything, you want to be a little closer. This is part of the tightening of the lip and jaw, this thing that we call the embouchure. So that is the chin, the back part of the flute itself. Make sure that it's not angled too steeply. Now the other part that you want to look at is the bevel here that's cut into the flute, cut across at an angle, and then the notch. These two things together are called the leading edge or the splitting edge. The bevel itself, on the outer edge of it, away from your mouth, you want that to be a nice, clean arc. No waves this way, or if you're looking at it from the end, it shouldn't wave that way at all. You want it to be nice and smooth. Same thing with the surface of the bevel, the face of it. You want it to be nice and flat. It shouldn't dip in, it shouldn't go out, and it shouldn't wave at all, either this way or this way. Because again, you want the air to come cleanly across that. Everything about here is airflow with this instrument. So you want this to be as flat and smooth as possible. This also applies to the notch. Now the notch itself, you don't want it to be too deep. That's in the tradition of other instruments, of which this is not part of. And if it's shallow, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It might make it a little bit more difficult to play if you're a beginner. But again, the original flutes that were found, they didn't have a notch at all. But the one thing that you do want to make sure is if you rub your finger against the notch should be nice and smooth. It shouldn't be undulating. It shouldn't have any craters in it. Nothing should stick up. Everything should be very, very smooth. So those are the things that I look for. Now there are some makers out there that are making their mouthpieces to look a little bit like shakuhachi flutes. This is a Japanese end-blown flute. Now the shakuhachi, the bevel is longer. In other words, it cuts into the flute more towards the foot of the flute, and they're wider. It's actually sunk a little farther into the instrument itself. So it's a longer bevel and a wider bevel, and this kind of spreads the air out a little bit. I personally find it to be a little less effective at making a good sound on these instruments. This is not a shakuhachi flute. This is a different flute altogether. The proportions of the instrument, the size of the board, and the lengths are different. So the mouthpiece does not work as effectively, in my opinion. This instrument is all about focus of air across the notch. The wider bevel and the wider notch of a shakuhachi style mouthpiece spreads everything out, so it's less efficient. You're not getting that focus that you need. Now, if you're a good player, or if you played shakuhachi, you'd be used to that, so it would probably work for you. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but I just think that it's not as well tailored for this type of instrument. One final thing, some of the people that make the instrument that has the shakuhachi style, they also make the wood to look like a piece of bamboo, and bamboo has joints in it, and a lot of times they'll put an imitation wood joint. It's just carved into the flute at the mouthpiece itself, and that makes the mouthpiece stick down a little bit. And therefore, when you put it against your chin, there's more mass there, and it tends to push the flute up, and it makes you lose the sweet spot. You have to constantly kind of fight to get it down. And personally, I think there's no reason for that. I want this flute's difficult enough to play as it is. I'd rather not have more wood down there pushing the sweet spot out from where it should be when I finally get it. So those are the things that I look for. Now, if you're interested in more information, I have some articles on cedarmesa.com, and I have workshops and other information on the SantaFeFluteSchool.com website. I will be giving 2 Anasazi workshops in June of 2015, and there's still spaces left in one of those, so if you want to come to a 4-day workshop, we're actually going to visit Chaco Canyon, I would encourage you to go visit SantaFeFluteSchool.com. And also on SantaFeFluteSchool.com, you will find where I give, how I can give you private lessons. I give private lessons over Skype, and if you have one of these instruments and you'd like to improve your playing and move to the next level, I would be more than happy to help you get there. Okay, so since we've been taking a look at this Mojave 6 flute, let's listen to how it sounds.